Storm Team Weather with meteorologist Corallys Ortiz.
Here's a good look right now on our Storm Tracker 7 Max radar. This is on loop within the last 3 hours, and you can see in the last 3 hours, just the storms have started to fire up. Several severe thunderstorm warnings, even tornado warnings. We had tornado warning reports just outside of Dallas ahead of that same line that's expected to roll on through within the overnight hour. We are going to be expecting to see a lot of rain from the bands from Barry, and essentially that's what we are going to be focusing on within the next span of the next 24 to 48 hours. But a lot of the times with these systems, with the bands of these tropical systems, we'll see very weak rotation, or it's just the possibility for isolated tornadoes, which we are seeing that right now. The best chance for this, though, to see some isolated tornadoes for tonight is mainly south of I-40, which we are definitely seeing that right now. I was just about to say that that same circulation that they've been watching for, that's over in northeastern Madison County, since the last radar scan about a few minutes ago, they're saying it is starting to weaken a little bit. Again, a good indication we mentioned is that whenever we see the lightning count start to drop, it's already not very strong rotation, or we should say, because there's not a lot of lightning indicated in this storm. So we are just going to keep watching out to see if the lightning count goes up or down. But right now they are indicating it is starting to go down a little bit. From down power lines to structural damage, it's been an active scene here on Thousand Oaks Boulevard in Memphis, one of the many areas impacted in the city as severe storms rolled through early this morning. Major structural damage was found on some of the businesses and other property. The Cottonwood Apartments in the Parkway Village community was one area dealing with heavy damage.
It was about 5 o'clock. We were sitting in his room, and we were sitting by the window, and when all of a sudden, the building started shaking.
Some residents were trying to stay in good spirits during the ordeal.
Windows started shaking. I was already butt naked and everything. Then I ran into the closet butt naked and said, I hope ain't nothing gonna happen too bad. I'm naked up in here.
Official reports from the National Weather Service say there was straight line wind damage surrounding the tornado, with an estimated peak wind of 105 miles per hour, leaving debris across 1.4 miles.
We just heard this noise, and they always say when like a tornado hit, be sirens like a train and stuff like that. You know how you have a plastic bottle and it's dented in at the top? It said pop, it popped out.
Residents in the apartment complex will be displaced, but are thankful it wasn't worse.
It's okay, God is good, he got us. So whatever we going through now, we ain't even got to worry about it. We already good.
Brad, Ariana, all weekend long, Storm Team Weather spoke about the damaging wind event that trekked across several miles in West Tennessee. I spoke to those in one of the harder hit areas in Adamsville who just say they are just focused on picking up the pieces. Take a look.
As you can tell, it's just a mess.
Debris is still lining the streets across Adamsville and surrounding communities. Everything from large trees and branches, even power lines broken in half. And it's damage like this that you can see sprawled out within an area of roughly 800 square miles in just West Tennessee alone. One of the hardest hit areas here in Adamsville. I talked to the community members and they tell me what they experienced during that time. On Barker Street Monday, there was still damage at several homes and properties. One woman says she took shelter in her closet. The debris made it impossible to leave her home.
I've only been scared by a storm about 3 times in my life. This lasted, I don't know, it seemed like 20, 30 minutes. It was like one wave, and then it didn't get calm by any means.
Across the street, Shay Young says there was some damage to her property. She says she's thankful a large tree missed her home.
Luckily, I mean, I hate to say, I'm glad it fell that way. It could have been a whole lot worse if it fell the other way, because I had 2 small children in there at the time.
It was almost a close call for Brian Bridges, who said he had just come inside from a shed on his property.
And about 10 minutes later, I heard something crash. I looked out the back window, and that's what I seen, and that's where I was at, in that shed. If I'd have stayed in there, it probably would have killed me, I'm sure.
It will be several weeks before any of this damage is cleared out, but that can always be replaced.
Oh, it was crazy. It was unbelievable. We're just lucky to be alive, I guess.
As you can see, this photo sent to me by Randy Wilkins. That car, unfortunately, definitely has been dealing with some of that damage from a tree that fell on it. And some businesses over in Adamsville, Spring Moore sent us this photo. Unfortunately, the roofing of those buildings were completely just impacted by those strong winds that actually reached with gusts up to 70 miles per hour. And unfortunately, some homes were impacted by this. In Milledgeville, they actually had a fairly large tree fall onto this home. No reports of whether or not anybody was hurt from that, but it's just a good extent of just how strong some of these winds were and how much of the damage was. This also was in Savannah with a fairly large tree. This is actually Julia Ewald's home. family home that was actually impacted. Fortunately, she said everybody was all right, but they did have a fairly large tree and caused some damage to the outside portions of their home. And essentially those areas, these are all storm reports of wind damage that we've had across all those areas that I mentioned, mainly stretching from northern Mississippi all the way towards just east of the Tennessee River, crossing over in the interstate, where we saw some of those trucks that were kind of turned over from the strong winds that were moving through earlier this afternoon between 12:30 and 2:30. You see that right there? That is not a tornadic funnel, but that's what we call a cold air funnel. Sometimes people might confuse these for a type of tornadic rotation, but for the most part, cold air funnels tend to form underneath showers and relatively weak thunderstorms whenever there's really cold air aloft. So when it does happen, you can kind of see that little tiny sliver coming out of those clouds. So again, these are called cold air funnels. They are relatively weak and they don't normally touch down towards the ground, but this is just something I definitely wanted to kind of show everybody so that way they can kind of recognize them whenever they tend to see them in the future. We have been seeing some of them reported really within the last couple months, but for the most part, nothing tornadic, and they don't normally show up in terms of rotation on the radar. It's been abnormally warm for one particular state, especially in Alaska. They're actually going to be dealing with a heat wave going into the weekend thanks to an upper ridge, which they actually saw some record heat yesterday for 4th of July. They reached 90 degrees recorded in Anchorage, with the last record was recorded back in 1969, where they had 85 degrees as their record high. So it beat it by a good 5 degrees, meaning it's never reached 90 degrees as in terms of recorded history. Looking to our north, I am kind of watching out for this, what we call a backdoor cold front. Not we normally see it coming from west to east this way. It's kind of swinging the opposite direction, but ahead of that we did have a line of showers, which right now actually are dying down. So maybe seeing a leftover isolated shower. Why are we seeing these conditions persist? Well, because we have this very broad upper ridging in the eastern half of the country. That's what's been keeping us very, very warm. And then this high pressure centered over the Tennessee Valley is keeping us dry. So that's why we have been seeing more of that rain chance, staying mainly to our north and into our west. In terms of the severe weather impacts, we do have a slight risk further to our south and east. Everywhere else is at a marginal risk. Main impacts will be damaging winds up to at least 50 miles per hour. I did show speeds up to anywhere between 30 and 50, with a minimal risk of large hail. An isolated tornado cannot be ruled out, although the stronger risks are continuing to be along and west of the Mississippi, and flooding could be a low risk as well. We will expect heavy downpours at times when that line starts to move on through. We really haven't been seeing anything in terms of named storms besides Hurricane Lorenzo. Right now, winds sustain 160 miles per hour, officially Category 5. It's actually the furthest east a storm this strong has ever formed in the Atlantic Basin. Fortunately, it's not expected to make any impacts towards the U.S., and we're going to continue to be staying warm and dry for the next several days, as you can see in our futurecast, as this ridge continues to build. I wanted to take a closer look at how defined the eye is, and it's not really defined. It already indicated tropical storm force winds earlier today, but didn't have a name, probably because they were probably waiting for it to show some type of eye formation there, which you can kind of barely see. But the further we go into the weekend, it will start to make impact and move very quickly. And there was some minor intensification as it continues to slowly move westward into more warmer waters. Unfortunately, not looking good for those, especially in the Grand Bahamas and Great Abaco areas, because they definitely are going to start to see pretty intense impacts, which include hurricane force winds and heavy rainfalls. Unfortunately, we're already starting to see some tropical weather alerts, including tropical storm watches for parts of the Florida coast, anywhere from Deerfield Beach all the way up towards Sebastian within the next 24 to 48 hours, with hurricane warnings for parts of the northern Bahamas. So unfortunately, we are going to keep an eye out on whether or not it's going to continue to intensify, but the forecast still has it put at a really strong Category 4, almost Category 5. Dorian has been in the forecast really for the last 2 weeks, unfortunately, making quite the large impact as it continues to track across the eastern seaboard. Still making an impact right now, currently winds at 90 miles per hour sustained, still making it a Category 1 hurricane as it makes its way through Nova Scotia. Still expected to stay a hurricane by Sunday morning, but finally weakening down by Sunday evening, and then making its way on now finally out of the picture. Unfortunately, unfortunately, it's not the end of that. Hurricane season is still just getting ramped up. We are nearing the peak of that. By the time we get towards our September 11th, we will be at peak hurricane season and already eyeing some other areas across the Atlantic. And this is just in the Atlantic. We still have the Pacific sometimes that they also are just as active. So right now we also have Tropical Storm Gabrielle. Winds are right now sustained at 50 miles per hour, but that's moving west-northwest, not expected to impact us. But we are looking out for these two tropical disturbances, one that has about a 20% chance of development within the next 5 days, another one still far out